In this lesson, what we're going to be doing is providing a crash course into 3ds Max. Yes, guys, you heard me right, a crash course. The idea of this is basically to provide it for level designers out there that are used to working inside of Unreal Ed, and they're comfortable with creating levels, and they understand weapon placement and, you know, working with brushes and moving static meshes around, etc., etc. But like we said in the introductory section, you know, one of the downfalls to static meshes is the simple fact that you now have to understand another application, such as 3ds Max, so that you can create efficient static meshes. Is this pretty fair?
Right. I mean, you used to work in just like your game's editor.
Uh-huh.
Like in Unreal Ed, you could do everything. All your BSP, your geometry was BSP, and you just worked with that all in one editor.
Right.
Now to get efficient static meshes, you need to go to a whole other program with a whole different tool set, all geared to just creating some geometry.
A whole new application. And boy, I'll tell you what, that makes things sound kind of scary. And for a lot of people out there, being forced over into a new application that has as much power as 3ds Max has can be quite intimidating at first, right?
Oh, yes, it could.
So here we are looking at 3ds Max version 5, and it's, you know, there's like buttons and sliders and things all over the place, but it's really not that bad. In fact, you'll find some of the things to be very similar to Unreal Ed. Starting out, we've got these giant viewports. Okay, so there's the similarity. All right.
Right, you got a perspective, got some orthographic views.
Okay, so in other words, top view, just like in working inside of Unreal Ed, when you're working on a top view, looking down at your actual map. Same thing here, we're looking down at the top. It's an orthographic view. In other words, it's a 2D, non-objective view that you're getting. We're down here in the perspective view, we're seeing things in 3D. Same thing as working over in a perspective or a camera viewport inside of Unreal Ed, where you're seeing things in 3D. You're actually seeing the level as it's going to appear in the game.
Exactly.
Okay, so viewports, very simple. We're going to come back to some viewport navigation in just a minute. Now let's go ahead and start breaking down some of the main areas. Of course, across the top, you've got your menu bar that gives you access into many different things. In fact, almost every feature available inside of Max you can get access to one way or other through menu bars. And we're not going to start breaking them down. As a matter of fact, Logan, I probably should go ahead and tell them that this is a crash course, and teaching Max itself can take, well, that can take years.
For quite a while. I remember my Max course.
I mean,
yeah.
I remember it too. But, you know, it all depends on how deep you want to go with the application when I say take years, because 3ds Max goes so much further than just allowing someone to create geometry, but of course you can apply materials to the geometry, and even that gets extremely complex. You can rig the geometry, you can skin it, you can animate it, you can add effects to it, particle systems, rendering. There's so much involved. And as far as static meshes are concerned, we're going to be using 3ds Max just for modeling and laying out our UVs as far as textures are concerned, and texture assignment as well. And that's it. So that's just a very small fraction of what 3ds Max allows you to do. And because of that, of course, I'm going to be skipping over a lot of different things, but I just want you guys to know that ahead of time. Again, I come back to saying this is a crash course in Max. So, toolbar across the top, or menu bar, excuse me. Coming down from that, we do have our actual toolbar. We've got the main toolbar that you're looking at right now. One of the things that you're going to need to know is that a lot of things inside of 3ds Max will allow you to slide them back and forth, as you see right here. Let's see, what else can we gain access to? If I come over here, you notice how I can slide this up and down. Okay, so just kind of pay attention as to if your mouse pointer changes to a hand, then it's letting you know that you have the ability to actually slide something. So be aware of that. Another thing I want to point out before we really start getting into some of these different things is you see the little triangle under there? Logan, are you able to see the little triangle down there?
Yeah.
Okay, this triangle represents a flyout. So for those of you out there that have never worked with the flow of 3ds Max or inside the UI of 3ds Max, just know that this indicates that it's a flyout. Simply click, hold with your left mouse button, and it's going to expose additional buttons or options that you can gain access to. And you'll notice right now this is actually a uniform scale, which we'll come back and talk a little bit more about in just a few minutes. But I can come down here and switch this over to another type of scale, and you'll notice now it's showing us that it is actually changed over to a non-uniform scale. Let's go down here, change it back. Okay, simple enough. So those are called flyouts, always indicated with the little triangle in the lower right-hand corner. Another thing that you need to be aware of in general 3ds Max UI, and that is, actually, and this also applies with version 4 and version 3 and all the way back to version 1, is that you have rollouts. These are rollouts over here. Basically, you can collapse or expand these rollouts. And sometimes you'll find that you've got tons of different things available for you over here in the command panel, which we'll talk more about that in a minute. But these, using these rollouts is just a very convenient way of exposing only the information that you want to see, or trying to keep your panel kind of cleaned up over here so you're not exposed to so much information.
Right. If you're limited on like what screen resolution you can run, you can just collapse everything you don't need to be looking at right at the moment, and then everything's a whole lot cleaner.
Exactly. And boy, I'll tell you what, you bring up a really good point, because there's people out there that still run it the good old 800 by 600, believe it or not.
Oh, wow.
And I'll say this now. I mean, wouldn't you say there's some level designers out there that work at low resolution?
Probably.
Some hobbyists at home, perhaps. Well, I'll tell you guys now, 3ds Max does not like 800 by 600. I mean, you can do it, but of course, once you start working with a high-end 3D application like this, well, it's a good idea to have, well, high res, just a higher resolution itself, and a larger monitor, by the way. Ugh, hate seeing people running things on a really small 15-inch monitor.
Especially when they have it set to like 60 hertz refresh.
Oh, that's even worse. Then your eyes want to start rolling with the actual bar that's rolling across on your screen as well. Ugh. All right, so moving back on to things. So now we understand what flyouts are. We understand what rollouts are. Another thing that you'll see as far as the UI in general is concerned is something called spinners. Let's see, where can we gain access to a spinner real quick? Simply click on box over here and take a look down here. These are spinner entries. Basically, I can come in here and I can type numbers in, or I can come over here and click on a spinner and I can drag the spinner. Just by holding the left mouse button down, I can drag up and down. You see that that number is indeed changing. I can also simply just right-click on a spinner anytime I want to reset it to its lowest value. So in other words, if the value goes to 0, you can right-click on it quickly, and it'll go right back to 0. Or, of course, you could type 0 in here, or you could drag it all the way back down to 0. In this case, it's not 0 because the minimum number of segments required for a box, of course, would be 1, 1, and 1. So if I was to right-click, it would just reset to 1 because there's no such thing as having actually, 0 segments. All right, so let's go ahead and just turn that guy back off for just a second. All right, moving back along. All right, so we're looking at our main toolbar up here. This is something that you're going to be using a lot, and it breaks down into some really important things. First of all, we've got our undo and our redo, okay? Undo and redo obviously is very important for, well, very obvious reasons. One thing I can point out is if I came over here and actually created a box and then came up here and selected my move tool and then moved it and then selected my scale tool and then scaled it. Now, of course, I can hit Control-Z, standard undo and redo hotkeys apply in 3ds Max. But I can also come up here to this guy, and of course I can undo and redo. But check this out. A lot of people don't know this, and I'm talking about people that work in 3ds Max, and that is you can right-click on these to expose a little pop-up window that will allow you. It's kind of like working with history in Photoshop. We can just come all the way back down to a certain spot in history and hit undo, and it'll undo all the way back to that area.
That's cool. So you can catch, like, go back to a specific step without a whole lot of
without
undo.
Exactly, absolutely. So let's go ahead and undo one more time. So undo, redo. We get into linking and all. This is parenting. This is something that's not going to be relevant right here. Moving on over these three icons right here. These could become important to some of you guys that are completely new to working with Max. The first one is just select object. So when I'm working in a select object state, I can simply click on various objects. As a matter of fact, let's go ahead and just make a couple of things real quickly. All right, so right now I can simply click and I'll select an object, okay? If I want to marquee, I can simply left click and drag. That will do a marquee select. I can, of course, select multiple things at one time, as you see here. So this is your quick little selection lesson. And if I click and drag, nothing's going to happen. I'm just pulling out a marquee window. This is because we're just in this select object state right now. But if I was to come down here, we've got move, we've got rotate, and we've got scale. Well, this is actually select and move, which means I can click on another object, which will select that object, and I can move it. But it's kind of dangerous when you're working in these modes over here and you're new to working in Max, because it's very easy to accidentally click and drag, and you may not have actually meant to move something, but instead make a parameter adjustment over here on the side. And this right here would have been a no-no. So then at that point, you would have had to undo it and all that good stuff. So sometimes it's very handy being able to come up here and just go into the select state. Okay? Moving over next to the select state itself, we can go ahead and hit select by name, and this will bring up a dialog that shows all the objects available in your scene. And then you can come in here, simply click on the object that you're interested in, hit select, and it will grab that object. Of course, you can go in and select multiple objects. You can sort them by type, alphabetically, color, size. You have list types, so that if there's something specific you're looking for and you've got thousands of different objects in your scene, you can quickly come over here and set a filter, basically. All sorts of good things in here, but just know that select objects is a quick way to come in and select objects. Okay? I will also go ahead and mention that if you hit the H key, that is the shortcut key to bring up this guy right here, select objects. And while I'm at it, I can go ahead and tell you that. Let's go ahead and come over here and hit the move key. If I wanted to go back over to select object, I can simply hit Q, and that will bring me back over here. All right, moving on over, you saw that I could do a marquee selection by simply dragging out like such. I can also come over here, change this to a different type of marquee. So this allows me, if I wanted to do a circular marquee selection, if I wanted to come in here and do a fence or any type of free form, I have all of these abilities. So let's go ahead and set this back to rectangular. Moving on over, this just gets, again, into filters for selection types, nothing we're going to get into right now. Moving on over from that, one more thing that's very important when working with selection. Sometimes you're dealing with a lot of things that are very closely placed together, okay? And when this happens, this may become quite handy in helping you with your selection. Right now, it's set to crossing, which this means is that as long as my marquee crosses over an object, barely touches it, it's going to select those objects. But if I come up here and take this guy and click on it and change it, now what it's set to is basically the object needs to fall inside the fence or the marquee completely. So you can see right now as I'm drawing out this rectangular marquee, I'm not completely encompassing either of those two spheres. I let go and take a look. It didn't select anything. If I drag out again, now look at that. I've got all of the green one in, and the one on the left is not all the way in, but I let go of the mouse, and it does get just that one. So this can become really handy from time to time. All right, we're not going to need to talk about manipulators at the moment, so moving on down. All right, our 3 transforms, very important. Obviously, these are important when working inside of Unreal Ed, being able to select and move around actors. Well, inside of 3ds Max, obviously, it's very important to be able to transform objects. So we have move. Select move, and you get a transform gizmo. With the transform gizmo, we can come in here, simply click and drag. We're relocating that object. If we need to constrain the object in a particular axis, just simply move your mouse pointer over one of the stems. It will turn yellow, click and drag. I cannot move this left and right. I can only go in the Y direction. Same thing for X. You'll notice that I've got a little L shape here. If I move my mouse over the center, I get a box. I can move around like such. The gizmos do look differently. If I come over here to rotate, notice this one now looks different. For those of you guys used to working inside of inside of Maya, very, very similar manipulators right here. I'm going to go ahead and hit my plus key. Plus and minus will allow me to increase size and decrease size. That'll just allow you to see the manipulator a little bit easier. Now, if I come over here, I can click and drag. It might be helpful if I go ahead and just turn this into a wireframe by hitting F3 real quick. Now I can click and drag, and what this will allow me to do is constrain it again to a particular axis. Okay, simple enough. And of course, let's go ahead and do a couple undos real quick. There we go. And scale, same thing. I can come in here and I can scale it again in a particular axis if I wanted to. You get the idea. All right, so from there, this gets over into the coordinates, reference coordinate system. We're not going to need to talk about this here. Snaps, this obviously is going to be something that's going to be very important. Wouldn't you say, Logan?
Definitely. I mean, we're going to want to figure out like how the grids from Max to Unreal relate, and then we're also going to want to have our meshes snap to that grid so that when we pull them into Unreal Ed, it's really easy to just throw your meshes together, especially if it's like a walkway. You're going to need to have it snapping exactly to other pieces.
Exactly. Snapping is king when you're in there actually designing maps. And making sure that everything will snap to the grid inside of Unreal Ed is very important. So we will be taking the time to talk about this here coming up shortly. So this allows us to just come in and do snaps. Of course, you'll see there is a flyout. There's 2D, 2.5D, and 3D snap types. We're going to be working with 2D a little bit later on. We've got angle snap for rotating. And then there's just a bunch of other icons that allow us to do other types of snapping and other various things. Sliding on down. Mirroring, okay, just to mirror an object. We can go in here and align objects. We can open up the curve editor, which is for animation. We can open up the schematic view, which is a visual representation of your scene and all the objects and any hierarchies that you've created. We're not going to be working in it, though, in this particular lesson. The material editor will become important to us. Basically, the material editor is our way. I'm hitting F3 now to go back into a shaded mode. It's our way of simply dragging and dropping to assign a material to an object, and then I can come into various channels that are available. I'll come into the diffuse channel, and I can add something to the diffuse channel. In this case, let's go ahead and add, I don't know, let's do a checkered. So I'll go ahead and select checkered. I'll tell it OK. You can see the checkered there. I'll go ahead and say, go ahead and show me this map in the viewport. And you can see there indeed is a checkered that's been applied. And then I have the ability to start playing with things like tiling and all to start getting a different type of look. So working inside the material editor, this is where you actually create the paints that you're going to apply to your geometry. Okay? And then basically we get down near the end and we've got the ability to render this stuff out, which is where the computer is going to go in and actually read all of the lighting, read the shadows, et cetera, and generate your final image for you. Not something that we're going to be doing inside of Unreal Ed or for Unreal Ed, is it?
No, I mean, we want the actual 3D geometry to be in the game and let the game render it.
You got it. We're not interested in creating a pretty little picture from inside of 3ds Max, so this is irrelevant stuff. All right, so there's just a real quick look at the main toolbar. There are various other toolbars that are available up here, all on the tab panel as it's called, and basically what you have is access into pretty much everything that you can gain access from over here. I will spend just a second and talk about this area, and later on as you guys are playing with 3ds Max, if you start to get curious, you can kind of stray off and play with these up here. This area over here is called the command panel. The command panel is broke up into 6 different categories as presented up here. We've got create. Well, when you want to create something inside of 3ds Max, you'll want to be at create. And even then, when we're on that, you'll see it's broke down into further categories where we can be creating 3D geometry, shapes, lights, cameras, helpers, space warps, or systems. In your guys' case, to be honest with you, you're going to be interested in geometry and shapes. Later on, we'll be getting into bones as well, but not in this particular VTM. Moving on over. We've got the modifier tab. Modifier tab is where you perform modifications to your particular geometry. If I wanted to come in here and select something and then come in here and say, I want to do some sort of modification to this. Let's see. Let's pick, I don't know, let's do a noise. That's always a simple one. And let's come in here and say, I want to apply a whole bunch. And you can start to see that it's going to start changing. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to apply a little bit of change to it, and then I'm going to change my scale factor up here. And so I can start to really blow this out. There you go. So I have definitely modified my sphere. Correct, Logan?
Makes sense.
Okay. So that's modifiers. Moving on over from there, we get into the hierarchy tab. Hierarchy tab is where we can change our pivot location, just like inside of Unreal Ed. From time to time, it's very important to relocate a pivot point. Same thing inside here. We can also work with IK and link info as well, something that's not relevant for this particular VTM. Moving on over, we've got the motion tab, and from inside the motion tab, we can work with various controllers. It all deals with animation in the end, and if we want to visualize trajectories, and we can work with them as well, from converting animation over to a spline and back from a spline. Again, just defining a trajectory or path of an object. Moving on over, we've got the display panel display tab. It is a very important tab where from inside here you can go in there and you can hide objects. If I want to say hide selected, you notice how he's now hidden. I can do unhide by name, and then I can select that guy and unhide him. There you go. So basically a bunch of things related to displays, what you'll be doing in here. Moving on over from there, we end up with finally the utilities panel. Utilities panel is very important. From inside here, there's various utilities that did not have a specific place inside of 3ds Max to be assigned, so those ended up being placed over here. One example is the polygon counter, and this is something that some of you guys out there, especially when you get into character modeling for Unreal Ed, you're going to really want to be careful as to how many polygons you create with your geometry, because it's very easy to get carried away inside of 3ds Max and end up with something that's very high res. So you have the ability to come in here and set budgets on selected objects, budgets on your entire scene, and use this particular utility to monitor exactly how much is going on. Pretty handy, eh?
Oh yeah, that would definitely come in handy.
Exactly, especially when you got to make sure you don't go over 2,000 or 3,000. The next thing you know, you're not paying attention. You've got a 15,000, poly count on a particular object. Let's say I'm trying to think of an example.
All of a sudden, the game's running at 10 frames a second, and you don't know why.
Exactly.
That'll prevent that for you.
So command panel, simple enough. Moving on down from there, we get down here into the bottom area. This little section over here is our navigation controls. Very important. Obviously, ability to come up here and zoom in and out. But let me go ahead and point out a couple more things, because we're going to start tying our navigation controls and a discussion with viewports into one another. Even though I did mention viewports a minute ago, now let's go ahead and spend a second and talk about them in a little bit more depth, since some of it's going to relate to this over here. First of all, there's always only one viewport active at a time. You can tell the active viewport for the simple fact that it has a yellow border around it. At least that acts as a giant indicator to me. All right, so if I want to select a different viewport, I can simply middle click on it. I say middle click for the simple fact that I don't want to have something selected, and I say, oops, I need to have this viewport active up here, and I accidentally left click in it. It does indeed set that viewport active, but at the same time, look what happened. I've lost my selection. I've got something else selected. I now need to do undo. That's too much of a hassle, where I could have simply middle clicked no big deal. Okay, right-clicking, be careful with that because sometimes right-clicking you can end up getting yourself a context menu or the quad menu, popping up. So I always just use middle click. Okay. All right. So back down here to these navigation controls. Zooming, simple. Zoom out, zoom in. If I want to zoom all 4 of them at the same time, all 4 viewports, piece of cake. Something that's neat to point out anytime you're using any operation inside of 3ds Max that requires you to let go of the left mouse button to commit the change that you've just done. Like right now, I need to let go of the mouse button to commit this change. Well, while holding the left mouse button, I can tap my right mouse button to just immediately cancel anything I've done at the moment, and that's what I've done right here. All right, quickly skimming through some of the rest of these. This one right here will allow me to zoom extents. Zoom extents is very handy when you're new to working in Max and you get lost in a viewport. Trust me, that does indeed happen. An example, let's go ahead and just come up to this area right here, and let's just kind of pull it away and back and away. And I know I'm kind of making it confusing because right now I'm not actually using these navigation tools, which perhaps I should, but I'll tell you, I'm using my middle mouse button. By pushing the middle mouse button down, I can pan, and by rolling my middle mouse wheel, what I can do is simply zoom in and zoom out. So now I can just come over here if I wanted to, and let's just change this to zoom all, and boom, everything fits back in there. You'll notice that there is indeed a flyout. That's because I've got basically zoom extents all for the whole scene, or I can zoom extents on the selected object. So if there was something selected here and I said zoom extents on that, then it's just going to zoom in on that one object. Does that make sense, Logan?
Okay. And that applies only to the current view or to...
That's correct. If I wanted to use all of the views, if I was like totally lost over there, totally lost over here, totally lost over there, and I'm ready to just scream, then I could come over here next to the icon that we just talked about, zoom extents all, click, and it takes care of all of them. Shoo-woo! Now everything's back in the viewport. All right, so... we also have Zoom Region or Region Zoom, a very simple tool but very powerful. I can come in here and say, I want to focus on this area right here. Simply marquee select, and there you go. Okay, so let's go ahead and just come up here, zoom extents in the whole area again. And then, of course, we can come over here and simply grab, click, and pan around, tracking the camera or panning the camera, whichever way you want to call it. Same thing as pushing the middle mouse button down. All right, next to that, we've got arc rotating. Do not arc rotate your top, front, or left views. You can do so, but what you have now is what is defined as a user view. This is what looks like a perspective view, but it is still an orthographic view, and it can be very misleading. So just try to avoid these. If you need to work in a perspective view, work in the real perspective view. A quick way to change this back is simply hit Shift-Z, and that will do an undo for a camera move. That's always a good thing to know. So in other words, if I was to pan this over and I was like, oops, didn't mean to do that, Shift-Z will then bring that back, capital Z. Okay? All right, so arc rotate, what arc rotate will allow us to do is go in here and basically rotate around. We can use these little icons right here on this manipulator to basically constrain to a particular axis if we wanted to. Handy thing to note, let's go ahead and turn this off. I'm just going to right-click on the view. You can always just right-click to cancel out of an operation or a tool that's selected. If you hold Alt down on your keyboard and then press your middle mouse button down, you can also arc rotate around as well. It's a handy thing to know. It keeps you from having to come down over here all the time. And finally, we can come over here and we can maximize a view and we can minimize a view. It's going to do it with whichever view you currently have selected. Finally, everything located over here to the left-hand side, we're dealing with our timeline slider right here for animation. We're dealing with our timeline. We've got over here for our listener, this is all of our Max script area for doing code, etc. And we can always shrink that up if we wanted to pull out a little bit more information. And then there's just some additional information, a status bar down here. All of this key stuff over here is related to animation, which is not part of the lecture in this particular VTM, so we're not going to go into it. So there you go. Now let's go ahead and let's see, a couple other things we can just wrap up real quickly, Logan. I think that would be handy. How does a person create an object? Well, creating an object, of course, I told you earlier, come over here to create. You come down here and select what it is you want to create. And then there's even categories or subcategories under the category that you've selected. So we're in geometry right now. We're looking at standard primitives, but we have multiple different things that we can choose from, or subcategories of geometry. If I want to make spheres, I simply click it. If I want to make a box, simply click it. But be careful because the mouse drags are different on each of these different tools on how the object is actually created. What I mean is, right now I want to create a box. I can simply left-click, hold the left mouse button in, drag out the base of it. Once I'm done, I let go of the left mouse button. That does not mean that the tool is over. I push the I push the mouse up, and you'll notice that I'm now defining the height. I left-click again, and I am now done creating that box. But the box tool is still active. So if I'm thinking to myself, well, let's come up here and select this sphere now for whatever reason, and I click, what did I just do, Logan?
Now you're starting to drag out a new box.
Exactly, and this can get you in trouble. Just be careful. Once you're done creating the object you want to create, simply right-click and you're done. Okay? Once you've made an object, you can give the object, or even while creating it, doesn't matter. You can give an object a name. I can call this my box if I want to. I can come over here and I can assign it a color by coming in. By default, assign random colors is checked inside of 3ds Max. If I wanted to make every object the same color, then I could uncheck this, select a color, tell it OK, and every object would be made that color. These are just generic colors. These are not actual materials. But that's good enough. That's all I really need to say there. Outside of that, Logan, is there anything that you think that I may have missed as a quick crash course as far as 3ds Max is concerned?
Let's see. I think that should pretty much get you up and running. Just keep in mind that some of the different primitives you can create, like the box, cylinder, just be careful when you first start creating those and figure out what sequence of mouse clicks and drags you have to do to define the shape you want.
Absolutely, 100. Man, you're 100% right. I will say this though. I did think of something else that I could go ahead and point out, and that is you can right-click on any of these viewport labels up here, and then from there you can come down to views, and then from views you can switch it over to another view if you want to. Definitely something worth knowing. And let's see.
What about like wireframe and shaded? I know it's the
Oh,
perspective
good point.
shaded.
Absolutely, and the other ones are not. You could always, of course, come into right-click, and you have a series of options right up here at the top, or if I wanted to change this over to from smooth plus highlights to just wireframe, I can do it there. If I wanted to come down here and go to other, there's various other things, like if I wanted to see it faceted, so now you notice it's not smooth. There's just various ways that I can do it. I will point out, though, a very nice hotkey to be aware of is the F3 key. And by hitting F3, as I lightly mentioned earlier, you notice it changes to wireframe, changes to shaded. This applies for whatever viewport is active. Be careful. This is not like other 3D applications where it's sensitive as to your location of your mouse. If I hit F3 with my mouse up here, it is the active viewport that will receive that command. So it's not a matter of where your mouse is actually at. All right, so Logan, I think we've covered everything we really need to as far as a crash course is concerned, just to get, some of our fellow level designers out there up and running quickly inside of Max, at least enough to the point where they then can start exploring and figuring things out a little bit more in depth.
Right, sounds good.
Okay, so that's going to conclude this lesson right here. Thanks, everyone.